Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Our next speaker, Julian Bleeker. So Julian is also, I'm so happy all these speakers could make it for this panel today. And Julian's one of my favorite humans. He's a self-described recovering PhD engineer, photographer, and product designer who just formed a bicycle parts company, as you guys know. And you probably would know his work from the Near Future Lab and his most recent TBD catalog, which hopefully he'll talk about a little bit. And if you haven't seen it, you should totally check it out. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you. There it goes. Okay, so I'm Julian, designer, engineer, publisher. So I still work, but not really, in a design studio with lots of top secret stuff that'll never see the light of day. I'm an engineer. I love crawling into things and figuring them out. And I did a book, a Kickstarter book that started successfully. There's a joke here, but now I see Tom Igo. He'll remember maybe a couple of years ago where I punked the sketching and hardware crowd to say, I did a Kickstarter and shame on you guys because you didn't support me, and people started like shifting nervously in their seats and looking at each other. It's like, did he do a Kickstarter? I didn't even hear about that. Just check Twitter. Where's it going? And the point of the punk for the sketching and hardware, all friends, and it was just good fun, was to basically look at the ways in which people represent the possible, what could be, and the different archetypes by which people represent the possible. And one of them, for me, a very powerful one, is sort of Kickstarter and all the things that it stands in for in the world of crowdfunding. So people do projects that are, you look at it and you're kind of like, oh my God, I want one of those. And we talked about it in the crowdfunding breakout session. And just even the form, like the visual design of the Kickstarter page becomes a thing where people are like, I have to get that, must get it before it sells out, add to cart and that kind of thing. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I love that as a kind of, a means to open up a conversation or a discussion about either just crowdfunding generally or specific aspects of crowdfunding. We were talking at coffee, Josh mentioned a device to actually age wine. Actually, it doesn't age wine. It kind of gives it better flavor by basically aerating it very rapidly. And I was like, Kickstarter retirement plan. Like, let's like white label blenders and call them age winers, and wine agers, and put it on Kickstarter. And I almost guarantee that would be like a multi-$100,000 success. Anyway, so this didn't really exist, but I thought it was a pretty good idea. But then the thing was, in Sketching Hardware this year, I said, okay, let me explain to you why I did that punk. I owe you an explanation. So it's just about this. It's about tangible representations about things that might be, but then trying to go a step further and construct some kind of representation about what it might be like to actually inhabit that world. That world with the wine ager, with the ear freshener, with the 3D printers in every room. What does that world look like beyond just that initial burst of excitement you get imagining having one in your home? Because often, not always, but in many cases, they're disappointments in all the kind of normal ways. Like the new device never works exactly the way it's supposed to. The advertisement for the self-driving car says it's meant to park itself, but it keeps ramming into the curb. Like whatever it's going to be, that's going to happen. So just some examples of stuff that we've done in the past. This was a newspaper that we did called Winning Formula. It was a commission from the Football Museum in Birmingham. And we proposed doing a supplement to a newspaper that said, what is sports going to look like in the future? And so it was just like a 12-page insert that they actually put into the evening paper that just sort of said, sports will be like, it will be sport plus data. We had things looking at, actually rather than doing a particular game, just run the simulation, because the simulation is actually better than the game. You can get through them quicker. All these kinds of ways in which you might just extrapolate today into tomorrow. There were a couple of things that we sort of, in a cheeky way, sort of nailed. So like we speculated that a lot of big tech moguls would end up buying sports teams, mostly for the data. So they want to own the data for the sports team, and we see that sort of stuff happening. We did another project called Curious Rituals. Maybe this will play. So this was a project where we looked at the way in which people might interact in the future. So looking at interaction rituals, the things that we end up doing with devices, and imagining those extrapolating into a future world. And so in this one is a self-driving car or self-starting car. It looks you visual face recognition to start the car, but she realizes that she had a different kind of like appearance when she first configured it. So this is the nozzle. This is what the nozzle does. It looks at you and sort of like, interprets who you are, and then requires you to actually change your makeup in order to look as you were. So yeah, why do we do these things? The reason I didn't know until quite recently, but the thing that I feel comfortable with is that as designers, engineers, artists, thinkers, researchers, we're not finishing our work. So we're proposing ideas, but we're not running them through to the point where we're imagining our ideas inhabiting the world in all the multivalent ways in which they would, which means they work well or they don't work well, they don't configure properly, they interact badly with each other, whether they're bots communicating with each other, do they get into surly arguments which you didn't really anticipate. And so this idea of finishing our work, by that I mean we need to basically add to the specifications and describe the characters and the props and the points of failure, the experiences that would come when we actually have all these things in the world. So these are some examples of real things that people are trying to build. And it starts out with a statement like, wouldn't it be cool if, ... quadricopters and drones are everywhere. In me, it's very easy to imagine that extrapolation being the equivalent of my next door neighbor who loves his leaf blower, blowing his leaves all the time. So quadcopters flying all over the neighborhood for one reason or another. What does that world look like, and how do we manage it? And what is the kind of what are the consequences and implications of that? Which isn't to say, we should stop doing any of these great, wonderful things, but it is to say, can we inform and shape our design decisions and our engineering decisions and even like our policy decisions by looking at what that, how that world plays itself out. Bathroom door APIs, I think I was proposed, someone was working on sketching in hardware, like cool idea, but like, okay, really, what is that world? Is it, on the one hand, people are like, would it be nice, like right now, if you knew the bathroom was occupied like on an airplane and a little light went on, like incredible increases in efficiency. All of a sudden, we're all more, we're not wasting less time, but at the same time, is that, like consequences for like personal modesty or whatever it might be. Aquariums on the internet. I know some folks at Highway 1 are working on putting aquariums, making them another thing on the internet. And what does that world begin to look like, and how does it change our relationship to our pets, whether they be marine animals or not? 3D printers for everyone. I'm a little bit nervous about that. Like, people are excited about it, and I get it. But having worked in a product design studio for 7 years with 3 very nice 3D printers, it becomes a real waste management issue. And so is there now a 4th bin outside of everyone's house, aside from the lawn and garden and the stuff that doesn't compost and the recyclable stuff that's like 3D printer waste? Like, these are ways in which we can start addressing those kinds of issues. And then the Internet of Things. Ooh, that's a whole thing. So what does that world look like? Well, I saw a movie. Maybe it looks like this. Not quite sure. But this, to me, is like one specification of what that world could be like. Maybe the world looks like this. We're all our personal assistants we get emotionally attached to. And so these are the kinds of representations that I'm sort of, I guess, trying to evolve and develop and encourage other people to pursue. It's not just a product requirements document. It's got to be a little bit more. You have to start telling the stories that draw people in and allow them to sort of think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it actually makes the design work much more robust and also a zillion times more fun. So when people say everything that can be connected will be connected, which they do say, I mean, CES just passed, I would ask, can you be more specific about that world? What does that mean? And if you're saying everything, I'm going to hold you at your word and ask you to say, if my fork is connected to my napkin, what does that world look like, and why would those things be connected? And you're doing that not as a challenge, well, it's a design challenge. Like, what actually are you meaning? Can you add more detail to that? Can you be more precise about those sort of open statements? And then what are the consequences and implications of that world? Describing it and sort of filling it out. So rather than just sort of saying we want a world in which everything's connected to everything, I would say, tell me a story about a world in which every bathroom door is connected with an Internet of Things door knocker and an Internet of Things occupancy sensor. So that becomes a little bit more of a more robust design brief in a way than just sort of opening things up. Or tell me a story about a world in which legend has it that fruit once came from things called trees, because people are developing fruit printers. So there's a reasonable chance that maybe not my nephews, but maybe their children are kind of like, fruit used to come from trees? That's weird. Grandpa, you're being silly. And those kinds of consequences are things that I think now it's worth thinking about. Tell me a story about a world in which a woman beats up a teenager for flying a drone over Connecticut beach. Like, these things happen that I'm sure very few designers of drones are really sort of running through, which is, again, isn't to say don't make the drone that you can fly over people at the beach, but it is to say we should start expanding the narrative and expanding the considerations around that sort of thing. Tell me a story about a world in which everyone has a robot personal assistant. I can't remember who talked about robot personal assistants and AIs, but that world might look like this. And this is a much richer story about that. Or it might look like this. I hope not. So a few years ago, I wanted to sort of begin to address these kinds of things, but do it in a very tangible way. And so I gathered a bunch of people together. Aaron was there. And we started with a brief to say, let's create a catalog of products from the future. So let's take today's, whatever's at the top. At this time, I think it was 2013. Well, no, it was 2011. When was it? It's way too long ago. 2012. The top of the Gartner hype curve, what are all the memes of the day? And now let's extrapolate those things all the way down to the long tail, to the point where they're 3 for $1. You get them at the corner convenience store. They're about as exciting and fascinating as a laser pointer, which to me is mind-boggling. I mean, the laser is Nobel Prize-winning technology, and now effectively it's probably the world's best cat toy. Could you imagine, if you're just what are you making? Making a cat toy? No, come on, that's not going to work. So looking at the ways in which we could do this, we used that archetype of the product catalog, and initially it was imagine SkyMall in the future. What does it actually become, and what does it look like when their 3D printers aren't as precious as they are now, but they're made by Cuisinart or something? Look at that and try to represent that. So we spent a day in the absolutely amazing archives of the Henry Ford Museum, where they've got a collection of all the McDonald's Happy Meals, which is fantastic, I think. And we did a lot of documentation on the process and a lot of discussion about how to represent these things. We did a prototype of what the catalog might look like, and then we actually made a catalog. So this, for me, is another one of those archetypes. Take your product, or take your idea, or take your sort of marketplace, your market space, whether it's Internet of Things or connected aquariums or whatever it might be, and now actually fill that world out. Don't just focus on your one thing. Make the entire accessory ecosystem. Make all the service infrastructure that's going to live alongside of it. We've done this, another archetype is comment forums. Make the comment forums. What are people going to say in their kind of really bad prose and hacked up kind of the thing didn't work. I got it and there was nothing in the box. People say these things about products, but it adds a kind of depth to the narrative that I think is quite important. Sold them all around the world, which was super fun. Put up some advertisements. This was all part of a massive be a social media whore kind of campaign, because I was very nervous about this a very large number of boxes living in my house, and I'm sure my wife wouldn't have been happy if they didn't sell out. So just kind of went crazy on the internet trying to promote it. Made it a little bit weird to say, so people are kind of I'm not sure what this thing is, who's this guy, and what are they trying to sell? And we got all kinds of wonderful and weird kind of emails back, people saying I already made that. Why are you guys selling it? Or what was another one? Hey, can you put my product in your next catalog? It's really great. These kinds of things made it all that much more fun. Fun billboards, and then just lots of just going out on Twitter and doing what Twitter does well, which is make up lists and numbers of things. So 116 truths about the Internet of Things, which still cracks me up. Opportunities lie within. Behold, the real Internet of Things, a catalog of things. Some are of the Internet. 116 products, 62 classified, 112 pages, reassuringly astute. Behold, water-based ice cubes go from retro to artisanal. And the point of the whole thing was number one, have fun, because that makes it better. Make it all normal, but also a little bit weird. Account for current day trends. Do it in print, just because that seemed like having a real thing. Added a little bit more gravity to it. Don't make it about predictions. So we're not trying to predict what the world might look like, but more make it about provocations, like conversation starters, things that people begin to start talking about and thinking about. And then make the extraordinary, like 3D printers, quite ordinary and banal. So it's that quotidian everyday that Fiona's panel sort of focused on in the yesterday. Here's some spreads. Just give you a sense of what it looked like. There was a lot of we called them sort of like ancillary material around it. So we made crowdfunding quite routine. So some of the representations, little pictograms in there would say, 12% funded. And so you get this sense that that becomes so ordinary and people sort of accept it. There's a lot of sort of algorithmic generated things. So there was a film that was like 98% algorithm written. There was just like a whole range of like very peculiar sort of bizarre things. Some of the things that made absolutely good sense. Some of the things just felt like you're kind of flipping through Alibaba on LSD or something like this. Cory Doctorow called it maybe 2014's finest science fiction, which was like, when? Panda jerky was another one because pandas go feral because they figure out how to clone them and they lose control, and so there's annual cullings. And then it got really weird. So you got a call from Fox News who were like, can you talk about your weather technology products? Which was wonderful. The funny story about this is that when I went there was the guy with the clipboard. He's like, okay, right this way, Mr. Bleeker. And you kind of go through and into the makeup room. I'm like, oh, this is a real thing. Like they're gonna like make me up. It's like, no, there's a closet behind the makeup room with a chair in it and a monitor with a fuzzy background of the newsroom. So then it looks like this when you're actually on Fox News, trying to be very serious. And so that's what we did. That was a bit of an experiment. Like I said, mostly to have fun, but then also my sort of semi-serious goal is that I feel like design fiction should be a kind of practice that is employed sort of routinely. It's the thing that I think now is much more modern than doing a consumer panel or doing a lot of sort of research to try to understand what the market needs. I think it's a way of sort of bringing back in a bit of creative insight and storytelling to enliven things. So the thing that I was concerned about is that people might not take it seriously. Like I thought this would be sitting next to the potpourri in the guest bathroom that people would just sort of like pull out and joke about. And I do think it's kind of a serious thing to think about where we're going and how we're going to get there and what we do want to do and what we don't want to do. So the next one that we're doing, another archetype, is the industry report. And we sort of went through the same process. So we had a workshop in Geneva at the beginning of December to think about how we might actually shift things around. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take literally things that you might find that people want to do on the Internet of Things and represent them in a couple ways. So we're going to be more straightforward with the archetype we're using. So, cans will be connected to the Internet, and the idea here is that cans will be traceable. So you can decide, you have control over the cans you buy on the Internet to the degree that you can say, I want 50% of the refundable deposit, and the other 50% can go to the person who collected the can, or you might be a little stingy and be like, no, I want it all. And so you imagine this sort of economy where the kind of, the folks who kind of go back and forth in my back alley on recycling day collecting cans, which I'm perfectly happy for them to do, become part of this larger kind of weird ecosystem of labor and remuneration, or maybe not. So we would talk about the can. We talk about the ecosystem that exists, some of the technology that would support a can that was connected to the Internet, and then do things like fake ads, like how would Alcoa, a big aluminum manufacturer, how would they represent this new innovation, and how would they talk about it as they might in an advertisement, which is complete, a lot of PR and that kind of language. We would do things like if there were an Internet-connected napkin called Tapkin that you tapped in order to interact with it, how would that be as a kind of earnest Kickstarter by a couple of Stanford mechanical engineers or whatever? How would they actually talk about it and describe it, and what would they say they're trying to do, and what would their funding goals be, and all that kind of stuff? When Google finally introduces the, I'm calling it Al Gore, the Google car, how would they actually represent it, and would they actually get Yves Behar to do the interior design of it in order to get a little clout? I don't know if people recognize this is sort of aping the Ogilvy and Mather car ad for the VW. There's some characters, so there's Ari Birnbaum, because there are always these kind of pundits who promote their ability to help you, sort of navigate this new world. So Ari Birnbaum is the data wealth king, and he will be on datawealthking.com. He's got a book telling you your data is your wealth and how to actually use your data in order to generate revenue. Apple's going to connect health to bespoke drinks, so your drinks are formulated for you individually. So Aaron, you'll have a drink called Hydrate that you can actually get from your Cuisinart that's connected to your Apple Health account to give you the right level of enzymes. And how would Apple actually try to sell that? How would they represent it in their idiom, in their style? They might also have lunch ready to eat for your child because they're also connected to that system. What would be the way in which that packaging would look like, and how would it represent a world in which data analytics kind of goes to its logical but also slightly strange and weird conclusion? So that's about it. We were going to do, I guess we'll just, so another archetype that I'm very interested in, and actually for IXDA, which is next month here, I'll be doing a workshop on quick start guide. So we're going to create a quick start guide for the Pilot Helios. So I made that up, but it's a self-driving car. So I'll have like all the 5 major aspects and functionalities of the car. How do you get it to park? How do you put it into taxi mode? How do you put it into privacy mode so that it draws the blinds when you're actually driving? Like all those kinds of things in order to play out the kinds of interactions and touch points and understand how the technology might live in the world. That's it. Thank you.